Hey, this is Dr. Ben Weitz, host of the Rational Wellness Podcast. I talk to the leading health and nutrition experts and researchers in the field to bring you the latest in cutting-edge health information. Subscribe to the Rational Wellness Podcast for weekly updates. And to learn more, check out my website, drweitz.com. Thanks for joining me, and let's jump into the podcast. Hello, Rational Wellness Podcasters. Our topic for today is the science and energetics of water with Michael Hobson. When I was considering having Michael on the podcast, I read about what he's about, and I read where he talks about the energetics of water. And I talked to my wife, Karen, and I said, I'm not sure if this topic really resonates with me because I'm really more focused on the science. And so Karen said, that's totally my topic because I'm totally into the energetics. So this is the first time I'm having my wife, Karen Weitz, join us on the Rational Wellness Podcast. And Karen is a Reiki energy master, and she's also a sound bowl healer. And you can find her at her website at allindivinetime.com. And she also posts a lot to Instagram under her name at Karen Weitz.
Right.
Michael Hobson is the founder of Aquinae Springs, which is a source of pristine primary water that comes out of the ground at 80 gallons per minute. It's a silica-rich, deuterium-depleted, low surface tension water. Michael is a mathematician, an econometrics professor, and a corporate business consultant. He had several businesses in the music industry, and his interest in frequencies eventually led him to water. Michael, thank you so much for joining us.
It is such a pleasure to be on this podcast with you, and honored that it's the first podcast that you've had that includes your wife.
How fun is this?
I'm thrilled.
That's great. So, Michael, how did you get involved with water? And did any of your prior business experiences help lay the groundwork or the groundwater?
Such a great question, Ben. Thank you for the introduction. I won't spend a lot of time talking about my past. It turns out that all the things that you mentioned are things that led me to where I'm at right now. So my training actually is as a mathematical economist and econometrician, but that's another lifetime that I was in academia, and then I spent some time in corporate life, and then in the last 33 years, I've started 11 businesses. Aquinae Springs, that's how it's spelled. It's pronounced, I should say.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah.
And just gives me the opportunity to say that that's a native word that means peace, tranquility, and clarity. So that's why we chose it, because the place where it comes from is very special. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. So anyway, the answer to your question is that along the way, it's interesting, at any given point in time, if somebody had stopped me and said, guess what, you're going to be involved in water at, 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now, I would have said, you got to be crazy. In fact, I admit sheepishly that probably up until about 10 or 12 years ago, I wouldn't call myself a big water drinker or consumer. So I can't look back and say, oh, yeah, I've always cared about water. I've always, been passionate about it and so forth. It's only when it came up as part of what my path was, what I'm here for, that I got involved in water. And it started, and I'll just give you a short little story. It started when I was involved in a business that I started called Classic Records, a reissue vinyl company of all things that I started in the mid 90s. And somebody about, somewhere in the early 2000s was interviewing me, and they said, "Oh, yeah, Hobson, you're a serial entrepreneur, blah, blah, blah. What are you going to do next?" And, I hadn't really thought about it, because I was being interviewed about this current business. And I, without hesitation, and this is a true story, I said, "I don't know, but it has something to do with water." So that was the first time I knew where I was going. I didn't know why I was going there or where I was going, but and then as time went on, you could say that there was this series of fortuitous or coincidental occurrences. But of course, when you look back, you say, well, that's part of the path, right? And so everything that I've done as I look back all makes sense now based on where I'm at. Okay, so that's a long answer to your short question, but yes, the trajectory was there, and it really does have to do with what Nikola Tesla said. If you want to understand the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration.
So this water is a primary water,
right?
What is that, and why does that matter?
Well, okay, so most people understand that the bulk of the water that is consumed worldwide is part of what's involved in the hydrologic cycle, right? So it's evaporative in nature, be it from lakes and rivers and streams or the ocean, which form clouds, and then clouds under circumstances that are still mysterious. Let that water fall back to earth, and it replenishes, and we draw it out of mainly aquifers, lakes, and streams, and so forth. And for municipal purposes, we, put that in pipes, and that's what we consume. And then there's the whole other bottled water industry that comes from aquifers of some description or another.
Or somebody's tap.
Well, yeah, that's part of the municipal supply, right? And
right.
Here in California, right, we know that in Southern California, we get most of our water from Northern California as a result of that nice Mulholland ditch, some people call it, that brings water down from Northern California, and then we process it, and that's what most people drink. So little known but true is that there's another source of water. And I'm going to tell you, there's an anecdote here. I know people are aware of the as above, so below comment, and I'll explain in a minute how actually what happens in the earth happens in our bodies as well. So the above and below is appropriate. So in the Earth's crust, the number one element, and this is true, you can look it up, is oxygen. So the Earth's crust contains primarily oxygen, followed by silica, in terms of the second most prevalent element. Actually, silicon, but there's a technical thing.
I would have thought it would have been carbon.
Nope, not. Again, all verifiable. Third, and this is one that I didn't know, and I was a little surprised, the third is aluminum, right? And we can talk a little bit about silica and aluminum.
Once again, I would have thought steel would have been much higher. Iron would have been much higher than aluminum.
I know,
right?
But again, all verifiable scientifically. Have a look. If you were a geologist, you would know this. So, and I'm not either. So anyway, so in the Earth's crust, you have oxygen. Also, we have hydrocarbons, right? Back to your point. And most often, hydrogen's bound up with carbon because hydrogen doesn't like to be on its own, right? It's one of those elements that is an unhappy bachelor, I like to say, right? And so when you have a circumstance where hydrocarbons are in the presence of heat, geothermic areas, what happens is when you apply heat to a molecule, in this case, a hydrocarbon, the heat breaks the bond, and hydrogen is freed up, as well as carbon, but hydrogen's freed up. Well, remember, it doesn't like to be on its own, so it's looking around for a partner, and guess what it finds? Oxygen. And when those two combine in that circumstance, they form steam because there's heat around, and that steam, in this case, and in other cases, makes its way through the Earth's crust, picking up trace minerals. In our case, we think the most important of which is silica, and then it comes to the surface and roars out of the ground at 140 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's an example of primary water that is made in the Earth's crust on a continuous and ongoing basis.
So I was listening to someone talk about where we have a water shortage, that there's no water shortage of primary water. Can you speak to that?
Well, I would say that that's true, that it's really about finding those sources, okay? And there are actually sources of primary water in California, and I just don't think that there's enough attention paid to that because people aren't really aware. But I think geologists do know about it, but it's not very common. And so maybe there's a future where we can, tap into the primary water that Mother Earth makes. Mm-hmm. And one of the great things about primary water is that when you think on this level of purity, it really doesn't get any purer than that, right? Because, of course, the water that's part of the hydrologic cycle is subject to all of the stuff that we already know about, the pollutants in the atmosphere. It's also subject to all the runoff and pollutants, that are in the ground and that make their way into, groundwater and aquifers and so forth increasingly. So, in terms of purity, it's about as good as it gets.
Now, when people hear about silica, that's essentially silicon, right?
Yeah. So it turns out silicon, if you look in the periodic table, is the element. But again, you got another one of those elements that does not like to be on its own. So the common form of silicon is bound with oxygen. And so it's referred to as silica dioxide, right? Which is a silicon atom with two oxygens, silicon dioxide, right? And that's the most common form in nature.
And so one of the benefits of this water is that it's very high in silica. Can you talk more about why silica is good? And then some people are afraid of silicon because they heard about silicone breast implants and silicon getting in the body, right?
Yeah, a very different thing than silicone implants and so forth. Silica is a natural what we refer to as a trace mineral. And in fact, it's widely regarded in the scientific community as one of the very most important trace minerals, right? So what happens is that it is the basis for bones, hair, teeth, skin. It helps with blood flow. It embeds into the capillaries and arteries and veins in our body to help with blood flow. It's known to be beneficial for cardiac health. It also binds to aluminum, and so
how does it help? How does it help with cardiac health?
Again, with the binding to the walls inside of the heart and so forth to allow the blood to flow more readily.
So is it keeping the arteries more flexible?
That's one of its purposes. Yes, exactly.
Interesting.
Now, interesting sidebar is that, and there's two comments here, one about water specifically, and that is that when we're born, we're about 85% water by volume, right? And by the time we reach, the elderly state, or let's say close to death, we're about 70 or 65% water. So you could say, and I think rightfully so, that the aging process, is a process of dehydration. Now, I'm not saying that dehydration causes the aging process, but they are hand in hand, right? And so the argument for staying hydrated, not just during your life, but as you reach the elder years, is important. And then, again, well known that that's the case. What's not well known, but is also true, is that over that same course that I just described, that period, we lose silica. So is it any surprise that that elderly people have issues with their skin, teeth, hair, bones, gut health? Silica is good for gut health as well. They have gut issues, blood flow, right?
Really? How do you have any idea how silica can help with gut issues? Is there a mechanism that you know of?
I don't know specifically about what the thought is, but there are studies that suggest that silica is important for the digestive process.
Okay.
But, with blood flow is something that the elderly suffer and struggle with. And then there's the issue of silica binding to aluminum. So what I was going to say a little earlier is, and again, there are books written, one by a guy called Stephen Exley, I believe, The Aluminum Age, that talk about silica's role in detoxifying the body of aluminum, right? And aluminum's everywhere. It's in the air, it's in food stuff, it's in things that we drink. We live in the aluminum age. And it's the third most prevalent element in the Earth's crust. So, but it's highly toxic to plants, animals, and human beings. In the case of animals and human beings, silica binds to the aluminum in our bodies, and we excrete it by sweating or urination. Plants actually, because they absorb aluminum from the soil, the silica that they also uptake encases the aluminum and renders it unable to inflame the plant, right? And that's what happens effectively with aluminum, is it causes inflammation. In the case of Alzheimer's and some of the chronic inflammatory diseases that a lot of the elderly suffer from, it's an inflammatory situation, at least in part the result of aluminum toxicity. So I think
I guess silica is a bit of a natural binder.
It is. And sadly, we lose it over time. And so, if there's a message here for me to share with people, it's that certainly as we age, we should be doing things or eating things or supplementing silica intake.
So either eat some sand or drink some high silica water.
Well, so, I'm going to say I don't endorse people eating sand. I know that
it's not particularly good for the teeth.
Well, it might drive a few mothers crazy because they're worried about their kids playing in the sand and so forth, which is a whole nother subject I won't get into. But so it turns out silica, even though it is the basis for sand, is digestible in this particular case. In the case of plants and vegetables and fruits, which is the main way that you get silica in your diet. Another good reason to have a healthy plant-based diet. I'm not suggesting people become vegetarians or vegans, but it is good from a silica standpoint. It turns out that the best way to get silica into your system is through water. It's the most bioavailable method of doing that.
I think it's interesting that you said that we are 75% water, because the earth is also 75% water. So
Shocking, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Shocking, isn't it? Another thing I wanted to share that I mentioned before, the as above, so below. So it turns out that when people think about hydration and they want to have their body fully hydrated, there's a couple of ways to do that, right? A few ways to do that. One is to drink water. You could drink other fluids as well that contain water, or eating. Obviously, a lot of food stuff, fruits and vegetables particularly, have a high water content. So those are different ways. But interestingly, people don't realize that taking a shower or a bath or swimming is also a way to hydrate yourself, because it turns out that our pores are a two-way street, right? So we can actually absorb water as a result of that. And
we need to filter the water that we shower in.
Well, there's that. Okay, I'm with you on that. Chlorine's not necessarily a good thing for our bodies, for our skin. But there's a third way that, Ben, I think will appeal to you from the scientific standpoint, and that is the well-known process of the electron transfer chain, which was discovered by Albert St. George. He won a Nobel Prize in 1937 as a result of some of this work. So it turns out that particularly at night, but even during the day, in the human body, we take carbohydrates or fats, which store what? Hydrogen. But hydrogen in a very interesting form, not in H2 like it is when it's bound to oxygen for water. It's atomic hydrogen. It's H. If you look at those molecules, it's H bound up with other molecules. So hydrogen bonds to those in a way that when this electron transfer process happens, hydrogen atoms are released. They find each other. And when hydrogen atoms combine, two H's find each other and form H2, they release energy in the form of heat. And at the same time, they bind to oxygen, because what do we have in our body? We have oxygen, right? Which is a crucial element. So what I'm saying to you is that the output of the electron transfer mechanism is heat to warm our bodies, to keep them stable at 98.6 degrees, and water. So we actually make primary water in our bodies.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I have a question. I go to Mount Shasta a lot, and we drink well water in the hedge waters.
Yeah.
So silica in the hedge waters, or is that different water than the
Well, that's a great question. I can't speak intelligently to that. I don't know if they report whether it's silica rich or not, or what the silica content. If you check out most waters, the silica content is either non-existent or it's actually very low. So, there are supplements, right? There are supplements that you can buy liquid silica dioxide and you can make a cocktail, which I think it's pretty expensive to do, but that's another way to do it.
I want to say horsetail, I think, is a
good source of silica.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen that as part of a supplement.
Yes, I would agree wholeheartedly. So that at least is a dive into primary water from the standpoint of purity, and an interesting sidebar about us actually making water inside of our body.
So what is structured water?
Okay, so there's a lot of controversy around this concept of structured water, right? And this idea is, from most scientists, even some people involved in water, the idea is that water molecules form in clusters, but then soon very quickly break up, okay? And so the argument is, by most physicists and chemists and even biologists, quite frankly, is that there is no basis to structured water, that it's really not possible. There is, a subset of people that are working in biochemistry and some physicists as well, and some medical doctors that understand this concept of what are called coherent domains, right? And that's a situation where water molecules, as a result of some type of stimulus, some type of energy input, be it from the cosmos, which we're being bathed with, maybe even from the cell towers that we use, right? We're caught up in that as well. And maybe even the wiring in our walls, the 60 hertz in our walls, all of that affects us, and it affects water and so forth. So what I'm really saying is some type of electromagnetic or vibratory input causes the water to form into different shapes that can contain patterns. And
so my understanding of structured water, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that we normally think of water as having one of three states.
Right.
It's either liquid, it's frozen and it's solid, or it's evaporating. And this is sort of a fourth state, like a gel-like state. Is that correct?
That is correct. In fact, a dear friend of mine is a professor at the University of Washington, an esteemed professor called Gerald Pollack. And he's written a book that you may have heard about called The Fourth Phase of Water. And it's becoming more and more widely accepted. It has been pretty controversial, but I think it's quite frankly irrefutable. And I think there's a lot of application of that activity in our bodies. And in particular, think about this, right? This is bulk, what we call bulk water. This is some of the spring water, but it's just, liquid water. And we drink that. And of course, we sweat some of it out and we urinate and so on. But the water that we uptake into our cells and tissues and so forth is not in that state. It's actually in a very structured crystalline state. So it turns out that the water around different organelles inside of our bodies and inside of our cells is actually in a crystalline state. And that is well known, right? So it's not bulk water. And by the way, it is becoming more and more well understood. I've got a book here that I think people should take a look at. It's called We Are Electric by a woman, an English woman, Sally Adee. And it talks about the electrical nature of our bodies and how the cells communicate with each other, tissues, how there's communication between the brain, the heart, different tissues, and all of these systems are communicating using light, using photons, and using electromagnetic impulses. And it turns out that the water in our bodies with the minerals, and that's one of the reasons why the minerals are critical, is conductive. And so we need enough water. It needs to have the right minerals in it in order for those neurons and those conductive pathways to be able to communicate effectively. Again, back to the elderly. What happens there? They're dehydrated, and as a result, unable to communicate in a way that keeps them in a state of health.
Now, I can't recall the name, but I did interview this doctor who talked about the fact that in order to get this structured water, it was better to get your water from eating fruits and vegetables than from drinking water, because by doing that, you're getting this structured water in this crystalline state.
Absolutely. In fact, I would not necessarily agree that that's the only way to do it, but from the standpoint of consuming food, absolutely. Yet another argument for consuming fruits and vegetables, because it turns out that the water that is there is in a structured state. And so I believe that is an accurate statement. However, from the standpoint of drinking water that's structured, it turns out that most spring waters, okay, across Europe, across the United States and so forth, are naturally structured, right? That they have some structure to them. And I'll zero in on this in a minute, because I really haven't answered your question about what is.
And it's hard for me to understand that, because what's in my head is, if this is a crystalline state, and now you're drinking a liquid, how does that square?
Well, think about how water is uptaken into our tissues through the blood, right? So that's one way that it gets into our. So if you have water that has structure to it, then it can make it into the blood. It also is absorbed into tissues through the gut, through those little cilia that absorb nutrients, that also absorbs water. That's how water gets into tissues as well. So, that would be a way to, and I think that's one of the reasons why we know instinctively, right, without even being told, that spring water is kind of better for us, right, than municipal water. I like to say that municipal water will keep you alive, but spring water will help you thrive, right?
I do a couple of things to my spring water. I think it's structuring it, so I'm not sure, but water needs to be moving. So I've worked
absolutely.
And then I also have a tensor ring. Are you familiar? So I have tensor ring over the spout, and that's supposed to structure it.
Yeah. So and now we're back to the question you asked, Ben. Sorry, I kind of went off out into the hinterlands there about structured water and about how important it is for our body. But I think that's some background. So if you ask the question, what is structured water? At least one of the definitions of structured water is it's a water that when you pass light through it at different frequencies, that it absorbs in a specific range, okay? Because remember, water, when you shine light through it, it can just pass a fair amount of that light through, but there is some part of the spectrum that is absorbed. And if you look at some of the work that Gerald Pollack and those folks have done, looking at a characterization of structured water, it's water that absorbs, okay, in the 240 to 280 nanometer range, okay? So turns out, interesting fun fact, that DNA and many of the organelles inside of our cells absorb light in the 240 to 280 nanometer range. So again, the argument is, and this is true, that around DNA inside of our cells and so forth is this crystalline structured water, okay, which aids in the communication of all of the bodily functions. We are electric after all. So anyway, if you wanted to take some water and have it tested through spectroscopy, and again, a lot of spring waters absorb in this range, and that's an indication that there is some structuring going on. I want to speak to Robin's point. Sorry, let me just finish this. I want to speak to Robin's point about there are a lot of devices in the market, some of which involve electromagnetic treatments, some involve magnets. Often they involve turning the water. And I think, to Robin's point, that the water that we drink should have been active on some level. And that's another indication of spring water, because what happens with spring water? It's been turned and so forth in the streams before it's collected and so forth. And so, there are different devices that I do think structure water. Do they structure it in a way that's beneficial for us? I can't speak to that, but water is this wonderful molecule that is really the source of life.
Cool. So you also say that your water is deuterium depleted or low deuterium. And I'm sure that's a concept that a lot of people are not necessarily familiar with, though we have had several discussions on the podcast about the issue about deuterium and why it's beneficial to have low deuterium water, and even how to structure your diet so you get a lower amount of deuterium as being beneficial for health.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to speak to that, but it just occurred to me that I misspoke and called your wife by a different name. Karen is what I meant to say. I just want to I get caught up and so forth. And I think I was so surprised that she's part of the podcast that, you know, I'm still getting used to her wonderful presence here. So about deuterium. So deuterium is for me, it's as controversial as structuring of water, right? And what I mean by controversial is that there are a good number of people that are suggesting that water that is deuterium depleted, however it is naturally, which in the case of a Queen Springs water, it just comes out that way, right? It's naturally that way. There are methods to produce deuterium depleted water. You could think of deuterium depleted water as light water, as opposed to its counterpart, which is heavy water, which is used in hydrogen bombs, right? So the process actually of making deuterium depleted water, not in the earth, but in real life, and with some of these companies that are offering deuterium depleted water, is one of, you know, separating. It's a byproduct, let's call it, of the making of heavy water for different industrial processes. So let's just take a step back for those people that don't know what deuterium is. Deuterium is it's a molecule that is closely related to hydrogen. Instead of hydrogen has, according to the physicists, an electron that circles a proton. Right, it's the most simple of the elements. Deuterium has an extra neutron. So there's a neutron and a proton at the nucleus, and there's still one electron. So the significance of that is that it's heavy. It's heavier than a hydrogen molecule. And it turns out,
let me just butt in really quick. It's interesting. There's actually an element that has 3 neutrons, and that's called tritium. That's actually the basis for the hydrogen bomb.
Well, and by the way, it's something that, as a result of those explosions, has, you know, shown itself in small quantities, but measurable quantities in the atmosphere and in almost all water sources that are part of the hydrologic cycle. So, for example, a Queen Springs water, when tested, does not have any tritium because it's never been to the surface before.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
Now, I'm not going to suggest that drinking tritium depleted water is going to make you live longer, but that's just an interesting fun fact. So anyway, so deuterium occurs naturally in water. And in fact, in salt water, in the oceans, there's 155 parts per million of deuterium in the water. And that's the standard, right? So if you say, what is deuterium depleted? It's anything below that. And there are some people that say, well, if it's really deuterium depleted, it's got to be 125 parts per million. But the truth of the matter is that anything below that 155 parts per million is considered to be deuterium depleted. Now, why is that important? That's where I think the controversy comes in, because there's a scientific theory or model of the way the cell makes energy, or the way that it operates. And it involves, and I know you've been involved in this, or you probably know about this, Ben. It involves a shaft and a rotor and a shaft, right? And these rotors and shaft turn around with little hydrogen molecules that get freed up from the structured water in the cell, and they pass through the rotor, and that's what causes them to turn. Well, the deuterium molecule is a little fatter. It's a little heavier, and so it kind of gums up that process according to the theory. And so the idea would be then that if you drank deuterium depleted water, that you'd have more energy. There'd be less deuterium to gum up the energy production inside the cells.
Yeah, I mean, higher levels of deuterium, according to that line of thinking and research, is related to higher levels of cancer and heart disease and mortality. And, so it's really, if it's really true, it's really a big deal.
Agreed. And the only reason I describe it accurately that way, but the reason I say it's controversial is, to be honest, I've never been down into the cell and seen those rotors and the shafts and so forth. So I can't speak, intelligently about whether that's actually what's going on or not.
Now, interestingly, the folks who promote trying to have a low deuterium level,
yes.
Number one, they do sell a low deuterium water, but it is like unbelievably expensive. We're talking about, I don't know, somewhere's on order of like $20 for a quarter or something. And
it's actually much more than that.
Much more than that. Okay. It's really expensive, right?
It makes our water, which is a premium water, seem really quite inexpensive.
Okay. And then number two,
about between $100 and $200 quite often for a bottle of this water.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah. I knew it was really expensive.
It's really expensive.
And number two, their conclusion is, in order to get less deuterium, because water generally contains a certain amount of deuterium, you want to follow a ketogenic, low-carb diet, because carbohydrates have more water. And if you get more water through your food, you're going to have more deuterium.
I think that that's a logical set of conclusions and steps if one gets, as the old saying goes, into the weeds with this stuff. And I want to shift things a little bit, and because I think this will play very much to Karen's expertise in this area, particularly if she treats people.
Leave me down in the weeds where I like to be.
the modality. Well, there's some weeds here too, my friend.
No, I like to be buried in the research.
Yeah,
deep in the bowels of PubMed,
which is. Somebody has to do that, and I can't think of anybody better for the job.
Value to that.
So I'm going to go on record as saying something that some people find controversial, and that is that because we are almost all water, and in fact, by the way, molecularly, if you count the molecules in our body, and this is indisputable, 99.999% water. And again, we talked about it being in this crystalline state, and we know about how important it is. Fritz Popp knew how important it was, another Nobel Prize winner, in terms of cellular communications and so forth, both from an electromagnetic, a photonic, and from a vibratory standpoint. And what I'm going to suggest is that our thoughts get expressed in our body vibratorily. Yes. And that's what happens to a lot of the cells and tissues in our body, is that by virtue of whether we have thoughts that are life enhancing or life detrimental, and I think people can pretty much easily understand what those are, that changes the structure of the cells in our body, what they, the size and shape of them, and that impacts their function, right?
Yeah, I always say to Ben, because he does functional medicine and he gets to the root cause. And I always say I get to the root cause of the root cause through thoughts. And
right.
I often say the words you speak is the house you live in.
Absolutely.
So
absolutely. And so, I personally have come to understand, and I won't go into details about that, probably not the right space for that, but that our voice is the vibratory equivalent of our thoughts, and that we're given this voice for a number of reasons, right? By the creator or nature or whatever, or evolution. And one of those is to change ourselves and to affect others, right? Yeah. When you go to a music event, when you go, you watch a movie where people are speaking, or you're at a concert, or you see someone of great stature speaking, and you're affected by that. That doesn't just come, I think, from the intellectualization of what they've said. It comes from an impact on your body. So,
sure. When I do sound healing, I just had a client whose whole body vibrates from the sound, and the water starts activating, moving in their body, and they sometimes they get uncomfortable, their arms get heavy, their hands curl up. So much activity from the vibration of the sound against the water in their body.
Absolutely. And so I think that's, if we look forward, I think more and more we're going to understand that there is two ways to approach the human body. One is from below, which I would say is the biochemical approach, which is, what we eat, what we drink, the supplements we take, and so forth. And by the way, let's not forget something, that every single one of our senses is vibratory in nature. Mm-hmm. Every single one of them. Okay. So our senses, the way we experience the world, is vibratory in nature. And let us also not forget that we're on a planet that's spinning at 1,000 miles an hour at the equator. Everything is constantly moving. Everything that we put into our body is moving. And everything has a pattern to it as we sense it. When you look at a painting, that affects you by virtue of the vibratory pattern that your eyes see. And that affects your body, and sometimes it repulses people, and sometimes it makes them feel wonderful. So I think what I'm trying to say is that what I call the top-down approach, which I'm not suggesting is the only or the best approach, just another way to think of it, is from the vibratory standpoint. And those two kind of meet in the middle, if you will. And I'll suggest this, although it might make some of the MDs and the pharmacists out there crazy, but I think all the compounds that are in drugs have exactly that effect. I think that's the mechanism. This lock and key mechanism, I don't see it. But, there's a lot of people that are bought into that, and they can't see it another way. But the truth of the matter is all compounds vibrate. So, you put a compound into your body and it has a vibratory impact, and it has an outcome, an effect. And sometimes it has some side effects, right? It's the same exact situation with homeopathy, right?
Yeah. Well, they say the medicine of the future is frequency.
It is. I think it is. But again, I want to marry these two and suggest that it is about frequency and vibration in terms of everything we consume, everything around us, everything we consume with our senses, everything that we process through our bodies. And it's all passed around in the context of water.
Yes. Because water has memory, the memory of water.
So sorry, Ben, I probably overwhelmed you there.
No, that's good.
Sorry, my friend.
He had me on. He knew that I had to go in that direction.
Absolutely. So I want to cover just one more topic.
Please.
And then I think that our listeners can get the water at some sort of discount, but I can't remember what the code is.
We've set up a special code for your consumers, and it's Rational 10. Okay. So Rational 10, and that's a coupon code that if they go to our website, which is www.aqueensprings.com.
Can you spell that?
Yeah, that's AQUENE springs.com. At checkout, you can put that code in. It'll get you a 10% discount. So, yeah. We want people to try it. I think once you try it, now, I have a question for you. And that is, I think we sent you out some water to try. What did you think? Put you on the spot.
I should speak to that.
Okay, please. Thank you. Thanks, Karen.
Because I can taste every water, and he used to think I spent a lot on water and that it was all the same once upon a time. Yeah. And I had him put like 10 different waters out, and I could tell you what each one was. And then he understood that I really have that ability to taste. So when I tasted your water, the first thing I noticed was the softness to the texture of the water. Yep. So that kind of surprised me in a good way. Mm-hmm. The taste is so clean, so easy. It feels very healing, but I'm just was surprised by the softness and the texture. So can we talk about
you are a great candidate for becoming a water sommelier. Which
I know.
Are actually water sommeliers, believe it or not.
There's such a thing. I would be
There
one.
really is, and there's a training that one can take, and golden tongues and so forth.
For those who don't know, a sommelier typically is an expert at wine.
Right, exactly. There are water sommeliers, and in fact, believe it or not, there are restaurants that have a water menu now.
Really?
Wow.
Yes.
Really?
I was at a fine tasting. It's called Fine Waters event that was held in Athens, Greece, a couple of months ago.
Gosh, I would have loved that.
I'll tell you, honestly, I really learned something. We went to a local restaurant that was a very well-regarded restaurant, and we had, I think, 6 or 7 courses. And with each course, the water sommeliers who were there at the event, and who were also judges, because this was a competition, worldwide competition of specialty waters, right? High-end waters. But they paired the waters with the different dishes, and it's unbelievable.
Oh my God, I need that.
It really is unbelievable. So there is a lot to be said. I think one of the things we talk about is the mouthfeel. So there's a kind of a softness, a velvety. And then there's a what we call the leave, which people talk about in wine tasting as well. But there's a slightly sweetness, and we don't put anything in the water, so it doesn't come. It just is naturally that way, such that almost it becomes addictive in a kind of a way, right? Yeah. Once you have it, you sort of go, "Geez, tap water just isn't quite the same after that," So.
Okay, so the final topic is, I just wanted to ask about, your website states that the water has low surface tension.
Yeah.
What is this, and why is this beneficial?
Yeah, so surface tension is a characteristic of fluids, right? So it applies to everything. Like there's a surface tension to oil, there's a surface tension to water. And so it has to do with the interface, okay? And what I mean by interface is the interface in water's case with the air or with other molecules, let's call it, right? So for example, if you said, I have a high surface tension water, which by the way, a lot of municipal waters are high surface tension. I'll just throw that out there as a fun fact. Then the water is able to support things more readily. So you could like float a penny or a pen or something more easily in a high surface tension water. And by the way, I think surface tension is a characteristic that also floats boats, right? It's part of that interface with the water that makes things float. So by comparison, low surface tension is something that is less structured, if you will, in the tension state at the interface. The implication of which is that high surface tension water doesn't combine well with other things. It likes to be on its own. Low surface tension water, on the other hand, is more readily combined or absorbed, in this case, by the tissues and cells. So low surface tension water in general would be something that would be typically more hydrating and allowing more of the uptake of the water into the body. Municipal water, a lot of it just passes through.
Awesome. When people say drink 8 glasses of water or gallons or however many, would you say you don't need as much water drinking your water?
I would say just in general that people don't need. That was an old rule of thumb, either 8 glasses a day. There's another rule of thumb that was kind of half your body weight in ounces, right? Yep. Which for some people can be, at least 3 liters, sometimes close to a gallon. Again, it sort of depends. If you're drinking tap water and a lot of it's just passing through, you probably do need to drink a little bit more. If you're taking a long leisurely bath every day, you probably don't need quite as much, right? If you're living in a climate where it's a little cooler and maybe humid, then you don't need as much. In Southern California and desert areas, I think you need more in those cases. So it's really hard to sort of pin it down.
Depends how much activity you do in your day, how much exercise, how much you're sweating.
I mean, if you're on a century ride on a bicycle, you better be taking a bunch of fluids or you're going to be in trouble, right? So it's a difficult thing to say. But also keep in mind, we make water in our body as well. So it's trying to keep things in balance, and it's a little tricky. I read somewhere recently where this woman was dehydrated as a result of being in the weather or in inclement conditions, and she drank a gallon of water and died as a result of drinking too much water. Right? You can actually drink too much water. And then there's another thing I think, Karen, you're probably aware of as well. Some people have this idea that drinking distilled water that's devoid of any other minerals is a good thing to do. And some people do that to detox. And I think under the right supervision, maybe that's a good idea. But in general, we do need minerals in our body for reasons that I already mentioned. And so I would never advocate that people exclusively or on a long-term basis drink nothing but distilled water.
Yeah. So. Well, your water is very easy to drink. So
thank you. Grateful for that. So.
Okay, great. So thank you, Michael. Thank you, Karen. I guess one more time, tell us your website again so people can find out more information.
Yeah, thank you. It's Aquene Springs, and that's www.aquene, springs.com. And again, the promotional discount code is RATIONAL and the number 10 at checkout, and that'll get you a 10% discount. And we just really want people to who care about healthful longevity to give this water a try. And, if it works for you, great.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for making it all the way through this episode of the Rational Wellness Podcast. For those of you who enjoy listening to the Rational Wellness Podcast, I would certainly appreciate it if you could go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and give us a 5-star ratings and review. That way, more people will discover the Rational Wellness Podcast. And I wanted to let everybody know that I do have some openings for new patients, so I can see you for a functional medicine consultation for specific health issues like gut problems, autoimmune diseases, cardiometabolic conditions, or for an executive health screen, and to help you promote longevity and take a deeper dive into some of those factors that can lead to chronic diseases along the way. And that usually means we're going to do some more detailed lab work, stool testing, sometimes urine testing, and we're going to look at a lot more details to get a better picture of your overall health from a preventative functional medicine perspective. So if you're interested, please call my Santa Monica Weitz Sports Chiropractic and Nutrition office at 310-395-3111, and we can set you up for a new consultation for functional medicine. I'll talk to everybody next week.